Welcome in from your SUV, from your tractor or your ute, or maybe you're even riding your electric motorbike. But from wherever you are, you're with Allister Moorhead and Glenn Judson, and this is the Al and Juddy Show. Well, what we want to do is reach out and provide you some technical information on a range of agricultural topics which may interest you, but to do it in a different way. Casual and comfortable format that allows you to listen where you want and when you want. This is intended for general information, and for more specific advice, contact your local Agricom rep.
Hey, Lara.
Are you from marketing?
I think so.
Lara from marketing.
Hey, Lara.
Hey. So we've got a few more questions. One from Fraser here. Briefly, for someone starting out in the agribusiness or farming industry, what would be your advice?
Yeah, hearing that, I would definitely recommend the fact that you should surround yourself with trusted advisors, people who you value and trust their experience, and recognise if you're starting off, you literally don't know what you don't know, and you don't know everything. And so the worst thing you can do in our industry, I believe, is stand in front of people and literally not, fake things and not give the correct answers. I don't think anyone begrudges someone who doesn't know something and then goes away and finds it out. So surround yourself with trusted people and recognise that it doesn't hurt not to know everything at the start.
I think the other thing I would say is take every opportunity to build your knowledge. And building on Allister's point that you don't know everything, but I think if you take every opportunity to build your knowledge, that's observing things in the field, listening to people who have been in the industry a long time. I think that's pretty critical, and you should take every opportunity to do that and actually be aware of the things that you're participating in and the things that you're seeing. So I think there is no one right answer. But I think the people that I see that have succeeded have taken notice of the things that are happening around them.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more on that front as well, is say be self-aware as a young person entering the industry. You will forge your path. You'll want to be valued and recognised, but just please be aware that everyone is watching you, which means that, behaviours, again, how you seek support or think you can do it yourself. All these things, people are watching you, and it is a small industry, and people do pay attention to you as you emerge in your career. So it all means something. Basically, the process of emerging in an agricultural career is that you're in public eye, you're in amongst peers, and it's a very small network. So be self-aware. People are watching. People value people that show interest, show thoughts, surround themselves with good people, and that would be one thing I would.
I'm definitely relatively new to the industry here, and to be quite fair, I found just being curious and asking questions goes a long way. People are happy to answer, so it's mean. One here from Matt. Where is the strangest place you've woken up? I like this question.
Allister, you can go first on this one.
Oh, you've done that to me quite a lot, Juddy. I woke up once on a New Year's on an outcrop somewhere north of Paihia on a Kaikuyu mat. With no one around me anywhere for as far as you could see. So how I got there and why I was there, you probably want to try not to remember. But yeah, that was random.
That was random. The most interesting place I've woken up, I had the privilege of travelling to Antarctica. And I remember waking up, we were on the sea ice, a place called Turk's Head, which looked up at Mount Erebus. And I remember waking up one morning and there were seals that were, because we were on the sea ice, there were seals that were actually swimming around underneath us, making all sorts of noises, right? So they, mating season or something, I don't know what it was. But anyway, the waking to the sound of seals below you in Antarctica is a really special feeling, but it's a bit weird knowing that there's probably only 1.5 foot of ice between you and the ocean. So pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Very
cool. That one wins, by the way.
If you guys have any questions that are technical, serious, or lighthearted, or anything in between, please feel free to email us at info@agricom.co.nz or flick us a message on our Facebook or Instagram page, AgricomNZ.
Thanks, Lara.
Thanks, Lara. G'day, Allister. You looking well? That yoga seems to be working.
Thanks, Juddy.
What are we going to talk about today?
Well, Glenn, we're going to come back to a question that was asked by Jason from the Lower North Island, New Zealand, a couple of podcasts ago, where he was asking to us to respond to a question around the pitfalls of uncertified or cheap seed. So this is the topic for today.
So thinking about uncertified seed, what is actually certified seed?
It's a complicated question in the sense that it is an official system that enables our country to trade seed around the world, and also for consumers to be confident that they are getting what they're actually paying for. It's run by the government and the New Zealand Seed Authority, and it requires a high level of scrutiny and standards, because this really impacts the trade of seed around the world, protects countries from invasive weeds and other species. So it is a very strong political, a government-driven system to both protect the consumers, protect countries' borders, and protect the breeders for the integrity of their seed.
So if you think about, as we're growing seed out there in the paddock, where do those checks and balances start from? What are the actual things that happen to that seed?
Oh, well, for example, our arable team, and this is really an area that I've got a little bit of knowledge, therefore it's moderately dangerous, but for all species that we grow within the arable networks of New Zealand, they have a set of requirements to meet certification. Many of these require crop rotations to be monitored over years. And so, for example, a change of variety in white clover, a paddock must not have had white clover in it for over 5 years and gone through multiple rotations in that time frame before you can change a variety and get it certified.
So that's to protect the fact that you're not getting the old variety coming through and some of that
and
seed.
Destroying the new variety. Yep. Correct, or destroying the integrity of the new variety. So it starts at a lot of the compliances around crop rotation, documentation, and the professionalism that the arable seed industry holds. Pollination, isolation distances, and so those things are monitored and communicated throughout that arable community.
So you've got this a seed that's being produced in isolation, so that you can guarantee that that's the case. I guess it also comes from stock seed that has been certified as being what the breeder.
Correct.
Yeah,
and many of those seed systems could be different based on brassicas and flowers and other things. But if I pulled apart what I do in the product development side of my job, is that the breeders create a nucleus seed. That seed is a tiny amount of seed, maybe in the 60 to 100 grams, that is taken through to a breeder's stage, and then that starts to become certified. So the breeder's seed is another generation, moves on to create basic seed, and the basic seed is stored over years to create the seed that is released to create the first generation seed. And in the majority of systems, it's the first generation seed that the consumer purchases. But because it's gone through a formal system, the integrity of the variety has been maintained at a high level through the processes of becoming a certified system and within the certified system. And at first generation, even though there's been 4 harvests to get to that line, the integrity of that variety is stabilised and is being presented to the customer.
And so I guess in a long-lived cultivar such as 150, for example, it means that if you bought 150 10 years ago and you bought 150 tomorrow, essentially the seed certification system allows you to be confident that you're actually buying the same plant.
100%. That's exactly what that process is there to do, is to protect the stability of that variety. Remembering it's cross-pollinated species, and that if that is not maintained every year, that pollen flies around in the landscape, and like myself this spring, getting allergies. I'm allergic to my job. I'm allergic to grass. That is pollen, and that pollen is the genetics from other plants. And so if you're not managing that with thought, you can over time get ingression and other things, and genetic drift.
So the system's set up to do that. What are some other components of that certification system from a kind of a wider community basis? I'm thinking about biosecurity and some farm management things. What does that seed certification bring for those aspects of farming?
Well, it requires a very, very high level of purity and germ to be realised, which basically means that there are literally no other surprises that come with your seed. Like you're getting predominantly the variety you're doing. The levels that are acceptable for certification are so great that we're talking one seed in a million from a point of view of outside contamination perspective. And there's certain species that if they are reported on a PNG, that the line will not ever be certified. So that's the protection phase from it not contaminating another environment that care about what they're sowing into the pasture. So it is a predominantly a system associated with making sure that the maximum standards are maintained, the minimum risk of something truly undesirable is there. And again, if the seed line fails this during that process, there is likely to be something that is undesirable for one farm business in New Zealand somewhere that the system is protecting from them getting this. And a good example might be oat production in Southland for oat milk, for example. The last thing you'd want is wild oats coming through in a seed sample from a previous rotation in your annual ryegrass, for example. So, these types of things start to become meaningful for individual businesses around the world, around the country.
And so, as part of that certification process, samples of those seeds that are being drawn officially, then going through labs. So there's lots of checks and balances, not only in the field but at the lab bench, if you like, in terms of making sure that what is on the certification system, on the certification tag, is actually what's in the bag.
Absolutely, and these the official lab at the moment, that is the primary lab run by the government. It is run to the highest of standards in the world, because this is also the documentation that allows seed to travel across national boundaries. So it has to be an incredibly official system. And so really, when you come back to the original question, which is what are the pitfalls of uncertified seed and or cheap seed, we've got to remember that majority of this sits inside domestic trade. Yes. So the seed that can't be exported anywhere in the world because it cannot cross boundaries or borders, the reality is then that is either disposed of or literally enters the domestic trade as what I've just described, uncertified seed or cheap seed. So
let's turn this around, and now that we understand what the certification process, at a high level, and I appreciate that that's not your day job. But
and I would actually say that's a big disclaimer associated with all that. I think it was at a high enough level that I haven't stood on anyone's feet. But the reality is that the sentiment is the structured and very, very official way that this process is run. And it by a huge group of amazing lab people, Assure Quality inspectors, and our own arable networks, and the reporting and recording of our arable farmer community. It is a big process that everyone works towards to get some pretty highly valuable seed, both to our domestic customers, but also across our borders into our international markets.
So if you flip that round and say, well, I'm a farmer and I'm looking to try and cut some costs in my farming business, and I've been offered this uncertified line of, and let's just call it perennial ryegrass, for example. Understanding the checks and balances that typically certified seed goes through. The question, and coming back to Jason's question, is so what are the pitfalls? What are the pitfalls in terms that I need to understand? Because it might be, and I guess this is kind of the genesis of the answer, is that although it looks cheap now, it might not actually be cheap in the long run. So let's start off with those. What's in terms of the first thing you'd say to me if I was considering that uncertified seed? What would be our first concern?
Well, I suppose it comes back to the question is why isn't it certified? So we sort of gave you the description of the processes and the levels of which these professional growers, the inspectors, the arable teams creating the crops, all these levels, the labs and the inspections, all these things. I've given you the criteria that they work to a fair degree. So straight away you say it's none of those things. As part of that first question, it's none of those things. So you could describe it as one, it has failed in some of those things, whatever we're about to buy or purchase, or it is a speculation crop where someone has taken some genetics, planted it in a paddock. I've got a combine harvester. I want to take an opportunity and move through the system. So you've either got it's failed the official system, which that should be ringing in your ears, or it is literally a speculation opportunity by somebody, which, and I would start off by saying there are certain things that are, protected by IP through plant variety rights, but the reality is that, there are options for farmer save seed as it stands at this present time. The issue is when you see grow a paddock, you grow a paddock that probably goes far beyond your demand. And so it's what happens to the excessive seed that no longer meets your demand. What do you do with that? Yeah. And so there are examples. Now, everyone has a right to purchase and take advantage of an opportunity. Everyone has that right. So we do it in our own lives. Some people buy high end every time. Some people buy lower end and then kick themselves later. And the reality is sometimes you do what your business and your life can afford. So this is not that. This is about the awareness of what this all means.
I guess so. Just to jump in there, in terms of you probably need to work out if you're attempted in terms of this uncertified because of the price, and that's your choice. I think there's in some cases that's quite legitimate. But what you probably need to understand first of all is this not certified A because it's failed, or B because it's never entered the system?
Correct.
So once you kind of understand that, and that sort of comes back to the level of integrity. If it's failed, you want to know what's failed on.
Correct.
And you probably won't ever find it out.
A point, for example, that something that's failed the certification system probably still stem from an official source, and then it was a contamination, a weed problem, not meeting some of the criteria, but the source was originally official. So I think I would start the discussion, which you asked originally about the ryegrass, using that. Well, if it has failed certification, the reality is it's probably still true to source, but it's coming with some baggage.
Yes.
That's probably the way I would describe it. Yep. We'll delve into that baggage in a second. If it's not coming from an official source and it was put into the certification and failed, that example aside, if it was a speculation crop, you have to ask, where did the stock seed come from? Because at the very best, it's come from a first generation seed lot, not a basic, not a breeder's, a first generation. But more logically, it's come from a second or third generation, which basically means there's been cross-pollination and the integrity of whatever you're potentially sowing to take the speculation crop is actually no longer the same crop. Open pollinated species like ryegrass is really good. They will drift over multiple generations if not managed. And so that's a big part of it, is that the point is, I believe this is what it is. Therefore, I'm going to tell the person I'm going to sell the seed is it's like this. And the reality is it may be quite different. And I think that's one of those criteria that the certification system does. It's true to origin. Once you get beyond that and once you start speculating, it may be contaminated. The paddock may have been contaminated. The drill may have been contaminated because the care wasn't there. The reality is it is probably a bit of a dog's breakfast of what the original genetic origin was. So what could go wrong with that? Well, the reality is sometimes, if depending on what you're using it for, not too much. At the heart and soul of what the grasses do for you and what you may decide on using it for. However, if you live in a landscape where intricacies is important, it is very, very important to understand that once you go out past first generation seed and you sow second generation seed, the likelihood of having an endophyte at any level within your pasture is very low. The second thing is, remember, I've discussed contamination and I've discussed crossing and also potentially paddock hygiene, mixing and drills and different points. You may end up with multiple endophytes within your landscape because the hygiene is not high. Now, the big assumption is all those endophytes are safe for all stock classes, and that is not correct today. So, for example, if you're growing nui, you've speculated on another crop, and you've got some nui in your other grass, nui has the wild type standard endophyte that is quite toxic to animals under hot, dry summer conditions. It's got Lorentrum B, valine at quite high levels. After 1 or 2 years within a paddock, that endophyte will start to dominate the landscape. And so what you've sown in the belief it was just a cheap opportunity now has changed. And if you put that behind a deer fence, you have genuine problems moving forward.
Absolutely. And so I think that's a really important point, knowing that if this is tempting to you, you probably, after you've sown it, do limit your the ability to use that in the ways that you could use when you were sure of what was there.
Yeah, correct. Or more importantly, you're believing it's just grass. You haven't valued these other things, and you've just put it into your landscape, but you forgot you're a deer farmer. And one of the fundamentals is you wouldn't actively go and buy standard endophyte and put on a deer farm.
No.
But you've trusted someone to say this is what it is, but there's no documentation, no measurements to say what it is. I actually have an example in front of me, which is a traded grass that a retailer in his network was moderately frustrated with this grass being traded in his environment. This grass was actually given a name, but it's not a certified grass. It's just been traded with a branded name. And he gave us some seed to sample, and it's, starts off, and we'll discuss it later when you discuss what else comes with your seed. But what I can identify is this line had 2 endophytes within it, not 1.
Wow.
And when I'm saying 2 endophytes, I'm not talking 2 quite different endophytes. And so that's, you could have a safe endophyte and a very toxic endophyte coming through that. So that's quite a big deal because, again, you don't know what this is going to role in life. It's going to go when it goes on all the different places it could be.
So endophyte's one. What other parts of uncertified seed or other things that come with uncertified seed could present a problem?
Well, again, the second one is weed burdens. Yeah. And the reality is no landscape is perfect. But we've spent careers in this job, and the amount of times we've been blamed on thistles, docks coming into people's properties, and all these things. When again, the P&G certificate and the formal certified seed has criteria to meet those levels, and it's very, very minute.
The bar's high.
The bar is very, very high, and so it's 99.9 most of the time, and so you do get an odd seed in millions, for example. I'm sitting here looking at the very same sample that we're discussing with these 2 endophytes, of which, by the way, not all the seed had endophyte in it. So if that went to the Waikato, for example, all the seed without endophyte would die within the first summer. So that's an unintentional consequence. But this was 96.8% pure. And the amount of other seed in it was greater than 1%. And what that means is the official sample sit at around 60 grams. And 60 grams, if you could picture a small plot trial that you sometimes see in marketing material from different seed companies, and that a small plot trial, when we put 4 replicates, they're 1.5 meters wide by 5 meters long, repeated 4 times. So what's that? Just say 50 square meters. We are talking about a seed sample that has 11 false brome seedlings in it. We've got Bromus hordeum. We've got geranium, dove's foot. We've got Rumex, which is dock. We've got Vulpia. We've got 44 Vulpia seedlings, which is hairgrass, in that 50 square metres of our plot. So just to try to get where the 60-gram sample with all these weeds in can multiply out in just 50 square metres, which is, not much more than half a house or half a small house, you have literally, 44 Vulpia species.
They would be, so in that example, they would certainly at establishment be very noticeable and of concern, I would have thought.
Or at the very first spring when they start to go to seed.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so sometimes the layman may not see these things at the start, but it's when they go to seed the following spring and multiply in your landscape that's the problem. So, this is the thing, is that the levels that you may see in the contamination. We've just received a chicory sample from the Manawatu, and I think that had something like 4% weed species in it, including brown top, including sour thistles, including a whole lot of things that in the medium term in chicory can be quite difficult to get out of and actually create a backward step in your pasture rotation.
Yeah, so imagine if you'd come out of a brown top pasture, or a pasture that brown top was getting into, decided that you were going to spray that out, go through a chicory crop to clean up and then go back in. If you were actually sowing more brown top with your chicory.
Yeah, that would be pretty.
And I guess that is the, back to Jason's point, what's the pitfall in terms of weeds? You could be introducing something that you don't even have on your farm in with the seed because it hasn't been through that certification process.
Absolutely. And anything, like I say, anything up to 1% is huge, really huge. And so to have 4% is massive. So, from a weed perspective, so we've discussed the endophyte. We've discussed the integrity of the genetics. Are you buying? Do you know what you're buying, and are you buying what you've been told it is? We've discussed that if it's perennial ryegrass, endophyte is quite a big deal, and for a couple of stock systems, it's really important. And also for many regions of New Zealand, the bug protection that endophyte in New Zealand gets, we've done 2 podcasts relating to that in New Zealand, so that's a big deal. So that's in second. Then the weeds are a really big deal, and quite regularly it's weed burdens that have reduced certification potential, or speculators that are growing crops. The weed burdens are pretty big. Well, it's got to be remembered that our dressing plants are very, very busy in New Zealand, particularly in the professional seed industry. They are often chock-a-block full of high-grade seed to be dressed. So it's quite hard for just someone to get something dressed to a high standard. So again, when you speculate on seed production and you are speculating that you want to trade some seed, not always are you able to get it dressed to the highest standards. So that's where this baggage starts to emerge.
So in that case, if we are looking for, in some cases, we're just looking for something to come up, and I can think of a couple of situations where that might be the case, then non-certified seed probably does have a role in those situations.
Yeah, in short-term systems where you're doing multiple spray practices, particularly knocking down and terminating, I will not take it away from the fact that you have a choice. I feel the shorter the system, maybe there's an element more justification for concept. But when you're talking about perennial pastures or really valuable crops that are the building blocks of your productivity and the building blocks of your future hygiene of your property, your individual property, your own business, not knowing what's going on is always the risk I would see as the bigger deal. Words are cheap. It's easy to say things and make people feel good about their decision, and they're making a wise, a thoughtful decision under the moment they're making that decision. And yes, you will grow feed. You will grow feed. The question isn't whether you'll grow feed. It'll be, will you grow feed for how long you want to grow feed? Will it be safe feed? And what will it look like in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Because you're investing in things that may be in the ground for 5 to 10 years.
Yep. And I think this is the bit that I would always come back to is the difference in cost, for example, or the saving that you make at that point. You've got to be really sure that system doesn't incur more cost in terms of more chemical, a shorter life, and those costs inherently are much larger than maybe the cost that you think you're saving at the start.
Absolutely. So what you describe by that is the hidden costs. So for example, if you do a good rotation and you have a nice clean seed bed, the actual post-establishment chemical use you did, and which is quite an expensive process with many different pasture sprays or cropper sprays, will be very heavily influenced by your rotation. And there's some big savings if you put an effort into doing a nice rotation to keep things clean. There's big savings by maybe not having to spray. And so suddenly if you've guaranteed you have to spray by what you've sown, the reality is that's an incurred cost that is guaranteed now, as opposed to you've already done a lot of work, you've cleaned up a landscape. The chances are that I can get this lovely legume establishment because I do not have to put a heavy chemical across the top to chase anything. And then if I value my legumes, which are quite expensive parts of those mixes, what sort of chemical am I putting over to capture some of these other weeds that may turn up, and how many times might I have to do that? So the key to that one is that there are potentially hidden costs in sheep seed. For example, having to direct drill back into a failed one, for example, is like, okay, so you believe that your grass dies every year because you're in a tough environment. Is it really dying every year because you're in a tough environment, or is it because you've got a seed line that doesn't have an endophyte that's functional in your environment and you are guaranteed you've incurred the cost to stitch into? Whereas by investing in something that the correct endophyte for your landscape, you may get that one more year's worth of production before you have to do that. And that year is really valuable. So my problem with the cost-based discussion, at no point have you used the word value.
Yes, that's a really good point, Allister.
And I really think that we discuss cheap seed, we discuss the uncertain trading, we take opportunities because they seem good. There's the irony. They seem good value for money, but you forget that you're about to earn an income off it, and it's quite valuable that it actually meets your expectations to quite a high level. So you haven't quite valued your future income stream as much as your front up cost moment.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the really critical point here, because it's actually the value that's being driven out of this is actually the big thing here. I mean, we often do look at we've got ryegrass, or our forage base is what drives most of our system, and it looks like it doesn't seem logical to put into those systems something that you have a lot of unknowns about that could in fact let you down.
Correct.
And so that, I think, is really the answer to Jason is.
And trust me when I say we have our own issues, because life is not perfect. And
I agree.
And so we deal with that every day, but the level of expectation sits with us far more because we go through the official process. What happens is words are cheap. This is just like something else. You can trust me. And what we tend to find in the industry is people don't tend to hold the trading of that seed to account. You sold me this. Something hasn't worked out. It's now cost me money, or I've missed production. If that was us, people come back to us. When it's in this trading situation, it's actually our cost that you will then incur, and then you'll have to go again. So, and you don't tend to go back and try to recoup that cost off these people.
I guess because you know that it was uncertified.
And you played a part in making that decision.
Yes. So in summary, because I think, again, great question from Jason, and I guess that's a really good, we've unpicked that in terms of what are the really key things that that certified seed gives you that uncertified doesn't. It's not just a tag on the bag. There is a lot of effort that goes in behind that to ensure that some of those things, and they're big things, weeds coming onto your property when you didn't have them, extra costs because you're going to have to spray, maybe not just one spray, but sprays into the future because you did bring that brown top in, or there was south thistle there that wasn't cleaned up in 1 or 2 or even 3 sprays, that now you've got an ongoing problem. I think that's the key thing. And you look back and say, for what appeared relatively cheap at the time has actually been a really expensive exercise because of all the things I've had to do further down the track.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's kind of the summary of that.
Yeah, and that's probably would be a good place for me to summarise the way I look at this is that it is a very formal system that exists at the moment from a certified seed perspective. I would say from a consumer, it is really that you're getting what you pay for, basically, and you have a confidence that it is what it is, and a system to go back and check on that. What could go wrong would definitely start with using perennial ryegrass as the biggest ticket item, would be the fact that endophyte and endophyte identification and endophyte volume within the plant, very unlikely to have a high level of endophyte. So any landscape with the wrong bugs is detrimental to its lifespan. If it's the wrong endophyte, it could be the wrong endophyte for your stock class, which is a even more unfortunate situation. Then you're looking at the weed species as we've discussed. Now, the key to that is the reality is that it'd be very unlucky if you got some really, really nasty things like ragwort, nodding thistle, things like this. But the point is you still don't know. And this is the real key to this whole discussion is that you do not know. And the levels that are likely to be in there are likely to be tenfold greater than in a certified seed line. Then I think that's the real finish of the system, this discussion of the pitfalls, is that in the short term, this material, whatever you may purchase, may meet your expectations. But once you go through a summer or once you go through a reproductive phase, all those other things may come out and get you because then they multiply. And I'd use an example of a traded kale, for example. Uncertified kale would be a great example. The likelihood for an uncertified kale to be uncertified is that it's got wild turnips in it. So you are literally importing wild turnips in your kale, which will fully reseed. And the likelihood is that you will never be able to grow brassica in that paddock again at a later date. So trading brassica at this style is a really fraught with danger because wild turnips and flowering brassica is an endemic issue we face already. We find it hard enough in the industry to keep these things at a very, very low level. But when you have so many fewer controls, the reality is you can end up with some real minefields in that situation. So I'd use that as a parting example. And I'd say, once again, the importance of this podcast is that you have the right to do whatever you like. What we encourage you to think about is to recognize that knowledge is power. And if you do not have the knowledge about what you're putting in a drill and putting onto your farm that may be on your farm for a number of years, probably what I would personally encourage you to do is to value knowing what you're doing. And maybe sometimes you require evidence to understand what you are doing on your property.
Oh, well, Al, good chat.
Yeah.
Like that. I see I've got about 170 emails in my inbox, so I better go and clear those.
That's strange, Glenn. I only have one.
Excellent. Oh, well, good to see you. Talk
Brilliant.
soon.
See you. Bye.